How do we do that? And the answer for that is that we create an entirely new view controller. Okay, a popover segue is a normal segue. You segue to a new view controller. So we're going to create a new view controller that's going to display the URL that's showing here in the image view controller. All right, so how do we create a new view controller? You all know how to do that. We go into here, we go up to the top, we grab a view controller, and we drag it out. Okay, now this view controller is quite big. Let's make it so we can see it a little better. So here's our view controller. So this is the view controller that's going to pop over. Okay, and we then just create a segue by control dragging. So I'm holding down control and dragging, just like any other segue. And this is going to be a popover segue. So this is the first time we've ever done popover. Okay? Now, once you create a popover segue, you can now kind of create this view controller however you want it to look to pop over. And one of the things you might want to set is its size. Because if this is our popover size, that's not going to be good. It's going to cover our whole screen. That's going to be horrendous. So to display a URL, we only need it to be small. And it's nice to have URL in one line so it's not wrapping because URLs have all those slashes. So let's try to make a really wide one that'll hopefully fit in one line. So how do we change the size of a view controller? Okay, because all our other view controllers have kind of inferred their size using these simulated metrics right here. You see this inferred size? But a popover controller is special in that you can change its size. Notice that you won't be able to do this until Xcode knows that this is a popover view controller, or at least knows that this view controller is going to be in a popover context because of this segue right here, this popover segue. Once you do that, if you go to your view controller and select its view, its self.view, then you can go dimensions, and these will be editable, the width and height. So for example, we could make this 600 wide and maybe 40 pixels high. Okay? Which is probably a pretty good looking thing. So that means when we press this URL button, it's going to pop over and going to be something like that. That's a pretty good size. 600 is the widest they will allow you to make a popover. Okay? So I think if you specify more than 600, it's only going to show up 600. All right? And you can make it any height you want, although obviously you wouldn't want it too big. Cover up all the content underneath. It doesn't really make a popover that would cover up everything. You would want to use a different kind of segue, a modal segue in that case. So we have this. And then this is just a normal view controller otherwise, this little view controller thing. So we need to create a subclass of view controller to be its subclass. So let's do that. And what does this view controller do? Well, it's a normal UI view controller. And it displays a URL. That's all it does. So I'm going to call it URL view controller, because that's what it does. It displays a URL. Okay? We'll put it in the place we usually put it. Actually, let's put it down here, somewhere like right here. What's its public API? Very simple. Property, non-atomic, strong, NSURL, the URL. That's the URL it's going to display. Okay? What's its implementation? Also really, really easy. Get rid of this. It's going, when you set its URL, it's going to update its UI. Now this is not a table view controller, so we're going to have to write the update UI. Also, when its view did load happens, also wants to update its UI. Don't forget this part. Okay, when you have non-table view table view controllers, this set URL might be called before your outlets are set. Okay, so update UI might do nothing because you have no outlets, right? So you want to do it again when view did load. This is very inexpensive to do, so I'm just going to do it possibly twice. If someone were to set this and my outlets were set and then view did load happened after that, it might happen twice, but it's very inexpensive to update my UI. So I can do that. So we need to write update UI. To update UI, we need a UI. So let's go back to our storyboard and give this thing a UI. And what I'm going to do for this UI is just drag out a text view. So I'm going to go down here, find a text view right here. We saw a text view from before, so I'm going to put the text view in here. I'm going to line it up. Let's go ahead and get its auto layout going. So I'm going to reset to suggested constraints. I'm going to check to see if it did something good, which it definitely did. You see that it's going to stick to the size of its super view. I like that. Let's inspect the text view. I don't want all this code. I'm going to put like http://www.stanford.edu. Okay, in there. That looks terrible. Let's make it a little bigger. 18 point, that looks better. Let's make it be centered. Let's make it be selectable, but not editable. So someone could select this and then copy and paste it into their browser and look at it that way. So that's good. We definitely like that. So that looks pretty good. That's a pretty good looking view of URL. And so now let's go ahead and wire this up to an outlet. Notice that when I do that, it's trying to do UI view controller. Why is that? That's because we need to set the identity of this thing to be a URL view controller. Right, it thought it was a general view controller. As soon as I do that, you can see that now it understands that this is a URL view controller. So I'm going to go ahead and drag to create an outlet to that text view. I'll call it URL text view. There it is, normal IB outlet. Let's go ahead and go full screen on the code here, like that. And now we can do our update UI, which is that let's just have our URL text views text be the URLs, its path basically. And there's a method in URL called absolute string, which will return the absolute path of that URL. Sorry, self.url. The absolute path as a string, which is what we want because text is a string. Okay, and we could do a lot more fun things, attributed text here. You could set fonts, colors, whatever. But we're just going to do a very, very simple update UI. So now we have this URL view controller, okay, that we're going to segue to, right? This is a segue. We are segueing. Oh, man, I should put my doc somewhere else. We are segueing from this view controller, which is an image view controller, right, to this, which is a URL view controller, via this segue right here. Okay? So let's go ahead and give that segue a name. We'll call it show URL. That's probably a good name for it. Okay, and then let's do the prepare for segue for this. That's the last piece we have to do. So how are we going to prepare for this segue? It's a normal segue. This image view controller is where it happens, right? That's where the UI is. So that's where we have to put the prepare for segue. So we're going to do that. Let's put it right down here. So I'm going to put a nice pragma mark navigation. And I'm just going to do void prepare for segue. And so here I'm just going to say if the segue's destination view controller is kind of class a URL view controller. Okay, then I'm going to segue to it. And yeah, I could also say if the identifier equals show URL, but for speed here, we're just going to go ahead and not do that. View controller class. Okay, so now I have the URL view controller. URL VC equals URL view controller. The segue.destination view controller. Okay, I've got the URL view controller, and I can just set the URL view controller's URL to be my image URL. I am an image view controller. So image view URL happens to even be my model, right? So I have it handy dandy, and so I'm just going to set that. Okay? So now I'm totally prepared to segue to this thing. So let's go ahead and give this a try and see if it works. Okay, so let's pick a photo here. Let's pick a better one than that. Let's pick one here. Okay, let's go back to Rio de Janeiro. Okay, there we go. So what is the URL for this? It's going to be some Flickr URL. So we click on URL, and it shows it to us. Some farm, some server farm at Flickr. Excellent. Now, this looks like, oh, good, it's all working. But actually, there's a problem here. Watch this. I'm going to press the URL button again. Oh, the smog is building in Rio here. Look at how, oh, it's getting, so you can't even see. What's happening there? Actually, that segue is happening over and over. It's putting up more and more popovers. So there are actually 4 or 5 popovers all on top of each other. That's why it's getting darker and darker, because popover kind of darkens the rest of the screen and puts it up. So if I click somewhere else, which is how you dismiss a popover, it's slowly getting rid of them all the way back to the other one. Well, needless to say, this is not a great UI for the user. So we don't want this. Okay, why is this? How are we going to stop this? Well, we're going to stop this when this segue when someone clicks on URL, we are going to check to see if we already have a popover up. And if we do, we're not going to do that segue. So let me show you how to do that. So first of all, we have to keep track of whether this popover is up. So I'm going to do that by adding a property here to my image view controller. I'm going to make it weak. This is one of the first times that we've used a weak property outside of outlets. Okay, but it's going to be a UI popover controller, URL popover controller. And the reason it's going to be weak is because I want to use the weakness so that when the popover controller is gone, no one else will have a strong pointer to it. My pointer will get set to nil. Get it? So now I'm always going to know whether that popover controller is up. But I've got to set it initially, though. I've got to set this thing to the popover when the segue happens. OK, so let's do that. And how do we do that? I said this in the slides, but you're probably like, what? But now you'll see it, which is this segue, if this is a popover segue, will be a subclass of UI storyboard called UI storyboard popover segue. OK? Popover segue equals UI popover storyboard popover segue. Now, I could just do this, but I'm going to be a little safe and say if my segue is kind of class, UI popover storyboard popover segue class, okay, then I'll get it. Then I'll do this. I just don't like to do casts like that without, checking first. Although if I got to here, probably is going to be a popover, but it should be a popover, but I'm going to check anyway. And now I'm just going to set my URL popover controller equal to that popover segue's popover controller property. If you look at popover segue, here's popover segue. I'm going to go to its documentation, okay, for UI storyboard popover, and you'll see that UI storyboard popover only has one property, which is the popover controller. Okay, so we're basically getting the popover controller from the segue. It's a special kind. Okay, so it's a little. Hopefully you understand that. Everyone understand that? Question? No?
So it's the same as destination view controller.
It's not. This is not the destination view controller. This is the segue itself. Okay, we're not saying segue.destination view controller here.
The popover controller is the same as
Okay,
the destination.
great question. Is the destination view controller, this thing, is that a popover controller? And the answer is it is not. It is a URL view controller. Okay, popover view controller is another class, not a UI view controller, that controls that popover. Okay, so it is not. So the segue is a storyboard popover segue out of which we get the popover controller, and the destination view controller is a URL view controller. Everyone got all that? All right, so now we have a pointer to this URL popover controller, and it's automatically going to get set to nil as soon as it goes off screen because it's weak. This is a weak pointer to it. There's only one other thing we need to do, which is not do this segue if that thing is up. And I actually talked about this in a lecture, how we do this. There's a method in UI view controller called should perform segue with identifier. Okay? And this is the system asking, someone clicked on something that's supposed to cause a segue. Should I do it? And right here we're going to say if the segue in question here, its identifier, is equal to string show URL, which is what it is in our storyboard. And this is a reason why maybe we want to check it here as well. Okay, I skipped over that in demo mode, but if we're going to check it here, we might want to check it